The moment I saw my stepmother walk through those courtroom doors in her powder blue blazer, smiling like she owned the place, I knew she still thought she was going to win. She had thought that for 23 years, every single time, but this time the judge was already reading from the file in his hands, and my attorney, the one I'd scraped together every last dollar to hire, was standing up straight, shoulders back, waiting. And I was sitting there in my navy dress, the one I'd bought specifically for this day, thinking about a kitchen floor in Dayton, Ohio, and how far I'd walked to get out of that house. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand what she was before you can understand what happened that Thursday morning in courtroom 4B. My father married her when I was 7. Her name was Lynette. She had a voice like warm honey and a handshake that made every teacher, every neighbor, every one of my father's coworkers say the same thing. What a lovely woman. Your dad is so lucky. She saved that honey for other people. At home, it was different. At home, the voice dropped about 10 degrees, and the warmth disappeared like steam off a pot. I learned very early not to leave dishes in the sink, not to laugh too loud, not to bring friends over without asking 4 days in advance, filling out what felt like an emotional permission slip, not to mention my mother who had died when I was 4, a car accident on I-75, black ice, gone before I was old enough to remember her face without looking at photographs. Lynette didn't hit me. I want to be clear about that, because sometimes when people hear stepmother and abuse, they imagine something physical, something that leaves marks a school counselor could photograph. What Lynette did was quieter, surgically quiet. She told my father I was lying when I wasn't. She told him I was difficult when I was just sad. She intercepted letters from my grandmother, my mother's mother, for 3 years, before I figured out why Grandma had stopped writing. She sat across from my 7th grade teacher at parent conferences and described a child I didn't recognize, a manipulative, attention-seeking girl who fabricated stories for sympathy. I sat next to her while she said it. I didn't speak. I had learned by then that speaking made things worse. My father believed her. That is the part that still catches in my throat when I try to say it out loud. He believed her because she was consistent and calm, and I was a crying 12-year-old who couldn't explain herself without falling apart. And maybe because it was easier. Maybe because grief does strange things to people. And he had never fully climbed out of the hole my mother's death left in him. And Lynette was someone who stood at the edge of that hole and pulled him upward, and he needed that more than he needed to look closely at what she was doing to me. I don't say that to excuse him. I say it because it's true, and because for a long time I blamed him more than I blamed her. And then eventually, I stopped keeping score and just focused on getting out. I left for college on a Tuesday in August, a partial scholarship to Ohio State, the rest covered by a combination of federal loans, a work-study job in the university's records office, and a second job waitressing Thursday through Sunday at a breakfast place 2 miles from campus. I called my father every Sunday. Lynette picked up sometimes. We were cordial in the way of people who have silently agreed to a ceasefire without ever discussing the terms. I studied nursing. I chose it because I had spent so much of my childhood feeling helpless, and I wanted, more than anything, to be the kind of person who walked into a room and knew what to do. I graduated in May 3 years ago now and matched with a Level I trauma center in Columbus for my first position. ICU, nights. The work was hard in a way I hadn't fully prepared for, even after clinical rotations. The kind of hard that gets into your bones at 3 in the morning when you've been on your feet for 10 hours, and a family is falling apart in the waiting room and you have to be the steady one. The one who translates doctor speak into plain English. The one who holds someone's hand when there's genuinely nothing else to be done. I was good at it. My charge nurse told me after my first 6 months that I had the best instincts she'd seen in a new hire in years. I held on to that. I still hold on to it. I got engaged 11 months ago. His name is Camden. He's a physical therapist, the kind of man who fixes things not just at work but at home. Patching drywall, rewiring a ceiling fan, sitting quietly next to me when I need silence and talking through everything when I need that instead. He knew about Lynette from our 3rd date. He asked questions and listened to the answers and then said, simply, "That sounds exhausting." I'm glad you got out. I cried a little. He didn't make it weird. We planned a small wedding. 40 people. My father's side, mostly Camden's family from Richmond, a handful of my closest friends from nursing school. I had a long conversation with myself about whether to invite my father. I invited him. I did not invite Lynette, and I wrote my father a letter explaining that this was my choice and my right, and I hoped he would still come, and that I wanted him there, and that I understood if Lynette being excluded made his attendance complicated. He called me 2 days after the letter arrived. He said he'd be there. He did not mention Lynette. I thought, naively, I know now that we had reached an understanding. The venue was a restored farmhouse, 40 minutes outside Columbus, all white-painted wood and string lights and a meadow that caught the late afternoon sun in a way that made everyone's skin look golden. My maid of honor, a friend from the hospital named Deb, had helped me choose it. We'd driven out 3 Saturdays in a row, testing different times of day. I cried when I saw it at 5 p.m. in October. We booked it the same afternoon. I got ready in a small room on the second floor with Deb and 2 other friends, a bottle of champagne we didn't really drink, and my grandmother's pearl earrings, which she had mailed to me 3 months earlier, with a note that said, "I found these, and thought of your mother, and then I thought of you," which amounts to the same thing. I put them in and stood in front of the mirror and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something was going right. The ceremony started at 5. 60 chairs, 40 guests, a string quartet that Camden had insisted on and I had teased him about, and then cried the moment they started playing. My father walked me down the aisle. He looked older than I remembered. He squeezed my arm twice before we reached Camden, and I squeezed back, and I thought, we're okay. We're going to be okay. We were halfway through the vows when I heard the door. Not a subtle sound. Not someone slipping in late and finding a back row seat. The door to the barn opened wide. I could feel the October air from where I was standing, and there were footsteps. And a voice. And that voice was the one I had heard every day for 11 years. The one that dropped 10 degrees at home. The one I had spent 300 miles of distance trying to forget. Lynette walked down the center aisle in a burgundy dress, with her chin up and her purse over one arm, like she had been personally invited and was running slightly behind schedule. She said my name. Not Camden's. Not, excuse me. Not, I'm so sorry for interrupting. She said my name the way she had said it when I was 12 and had forgotten to switch the laundry. Like a verdict. The string quartet stopped. Camden's hand went tighter around mine. My father, standing in the front row now, had gone the color of the white walls. She said she had something to say before we went any further. She said it with the same calm she had deployed my entire childhood, that surgical room temperature calm. She said that there were things about me that Camden deserved to know before he made this commitment. She used the word instability. She used the phrase history of dishonesty. She looked directly at Camden and said she was only doing this out of love for the family. I felt the whole room before I saw it. 40 people holding their breath at exactly the same time. Then I heard a chair move. Camden's mother stood up from the second row. Her name is Beverly Bev. Everyone calls her. And she is 71 years old and has survived her husband's death and 2 knee replacements in a flood that destroyed the first floor of her home in Richmond. And she is not a woman who sits down when something needs to be said. She said clearly enough that every person in that room heard it, "Sit down. This is not your day, and it is not your place, and you will not do this here." Lynette turned to look at her. Bev did not sit down. 2 of Camden's cousins were already standing. My friend Deb had moved to the edge of the aisle. The officiant, a woman named Ruth, who Camden and I had met with 4 times and who had seemed unflappable in every meeting, stepped forward and said that the ceremony would continue and that anyone who was not a guest was welcome to see themselves out. Lynette looked around the room. For one moment, just one, the temperature of her expression dropped and something underneath it showed something that was not calm at all, and then she pressed her mouth together and turned and walked back out the door. The October air came in one more time. Then the door closed. I was shaking. I didn't realize it until Camden took both of my hands in his and held them and said quietly, "Hey, look at me." I looked at him. He said, "We good?" And I laughed, actually laughed, a short, real laugh, and I said yes. And Ruth said, "Shall we?" And the string quartet started again. We got married. Afterward, during the reception, my father found me near the dessert table. He looked diminished in a way I'd never seen before, like something structural inside him had given way. He said he hadn't known she was coming. He said he had told her not to come. He said he didn't know how she had found the venue. He was crying in the way men cry when they've been holding it back for too long. Jaw tight, eyes wet, voice very controlled. I believed him. I also knew that this was not over. She filed a complaint against me with the Ohio Board of Nursing 3 weeks later. The complaint alleged that I had a history of falsifying records at my workplace, that multiple colleagues had corroborated instances of dishonest behavior, and that I represented a risk to patient safety. It used formal language and specific-sounding terminology, and it had clearly been written with help, either a lawyer or someone who knew how to make things sound credible. My director called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon and closed the door. I sat across from her and I felt 11 years old again. I felt the parent-teacher conference and the classroom chair and the word manipulative and the way it had landed on me like something physical. My director, whose name is Sandra, and who has run that ICU for 16 years and does not make quick judgments about people, looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "I'm going to ask you directly. Is there anything in here that is true?" I said no. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "Then we're going to respond to this. Together." What followed was 4 months I do not wish on anyone. An investigation by the board. Interviews with my colleagues, my charge nurse, 3 of my regular patients' family members who had voluntarily offered to speak on my behalf. Documentation reviews. A formal hearing in which I sat at a table across from a panel of 5 people and answered questions for 2.5 hours while Lynette's written complaint was read aloud paragraph by paragraph. My attorney, a woman I had found through a nursing advocacy organization, no nonsense, sharp, with a particular dislike for what she called paperwork harassment, had told me going in, "They're looking for consistency. Your record is consistent. Your colleagues are consistent. Her complaint is not, because it's not based on anything real, and that's going to show." She was right. The board dismissed the complaint. Insufficient evidence, no findings of misconduct. My charge nurse sent me a text that said "told you so," with 3 exclamation points. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 15 minutes and just breathed. But Lynette wasn't done. 2 months after the board dismissed the complaint, she called Camden's employer. He works for a rehabilitation clinic affiliated with a university hospital, and told them that Camden had a substance abuse problem that he had concealed during his hiring process. She provided no evidence because there was none. Camden has never had a substance abuse problem. He barely drinks. The call was anonymous, but Camden's office manager recognized the voice from our wedding video, which Dev had filmed on her phone and which my father-in-law had apparently shared at a family gathering Lynette had later seen footage of. Camden filed a police report, and then my attorney filed a civil suit, defamation, notorious interference with professional relationships, intentional infliction of emotional distress. That is what brought us to courtroom 4B on a Thursday morning in March. Lynette arrived with an attorney of her own, a man in an expensive suit who had the particular energy of someone who had spent decades convincing other people to doubt their own perceptions. He had filed 3 motions to dismiss in the preceding months. All 3 had been denied. He was not, I noticed, smiling. Lynette was. Right up until the judge started reading. The evidence we had was not dramatic. It was not a single smoking gun. It was a paternal, methodical, documented spanning months. Phone records showing the call to Camden's employer. A copy of the nursing board complaint with metadata tracing the document's creation to a device registered in Lynette's name. 2 witnesses, a neighbor who had overheard Lynette describe her plan to make things difficult for me before our wedding, and my grandmother, who flew in from Sarasota at 81 years old to testify about the letters Lynette had intercepted when I was a child. My grandmother sat in that witness stand in her good blue coat and answered every question in a clear, steady voice. She described the letters she had sent, birthdays, Christmases, the anniversary of my mother's death. She described calling my father, once, to ask why I had stopped writing back. and being told by Lynette that I had said I didn't want contact with that side of the family. She described the moment, 14 years later, when I had called her and she had realized what had happened. She said, "I lost 11 years of my granddaughter because of that woman. I would like that on the record." The judge let it stand. Lynette's attorney cross-examined my grandmother for 12 minutes. He did not shake her. She is 81 years old and has buried a daughter, and she was not going to be shaken by a man in an expensive suit. The proceedings took 2 days. Closing arguments on the morning of the 3rd. The judge ruled on a Friday. Defamation, proven. Notorious interference, proven. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, proven. The damages were not enormous. This was not a movie, and judges in Ohio are measured people, but they were real. Enough to cover our legal fees and then some. Enough to matter. Enough that Lynette's attorney went very still when the number was read aloud. Lynette, for the first time in my memory, did not look calm. My father was not in the courtroom. He had not been part of the suit. I had not named him, and I had not asked him to testify, and he had not offered. We have spoken twice since the wedding. Brief calls, careful. Like two people navigating a room, they both remember differently. I don't know what his marriage looks like now. I don't know if he is still with her. That chapter is his to live, not mine to manage. After the ruling, standing outside the courthouse in the March cold, Camden put his arm around me and said nothing for a while. Deb was there, and my grandmother, and my attorney, who shook my hand and said good work in a way that felt like exactly the right amount of words. My grandmother held both of my hands and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Your mother would have been so proud of you." She was stubborn like this too. I held on to that the whole drive home. There is a thing that happens, I've noticed, when you've spent most of your life bracing for something. When the impact finally comes, and it always comes, because people like Lynette are relentless. They depend on the relentlessness. Your body doesn't know right away that it's over. You keep waiting for the next thing. You keep your shoulders up. You lie awake running contingencies. It took me a few weeks after the ruling before I stopped checking my email compulsively, before I stopped tensing when an unknown number called. Camden noticed. He didn't make a big thing of it. He just made sure the apartment was quiet when I needed quiet and made dinner on my long shift nights and occasionally sat down next to me on the couch and said, "You're allowed to stop waiting for the other shoe." He was right. I know he was right. I'm back on nights now. The ICU in late winter has its own rhythm. Long stretches of stillness, broken by moments where everything happens at once, and you have to become very calm very fast, and afterward you carry a particular kind of tired that sleep doesn't entirely fix. I'm used to it. I'm good at it. Last week, a patient's daughter stopped me in the hallway near the end of my shift. Her mother had been with us for 10 days, a serious case, touch and go for a while, and had been moved to step down that morning. The daughter looked exhausted and relieved in the particular combination that comes after a long vigil. She said, "I just wanted to tell you that every time you were in that room, my mother was calmer. I don't know how you do that." I said I was glad I could help. Walking out to my car afterward, keys in hand, the sky just starting to lighten at the edge. That particular blue that happens before the sun actually appears. I thought about a 7-year-old girl in a kitchen in Dayton who had learned to be very quiet, and about how that girl had eventually figured out that stillness is not the same as weakness, that knowing how to wait does not mean you've given up. I thought about my grandmother's hands around mine on the courthouse steps. I thought about Camden saying, "Hey, look at me." I thought about Bev standing up in that barn in October and not sitting back down. You build a life out of the people who stood up. You build it piece by piece. And it doesn't look like the life you imagined when you were small, because you didn't have the vocabulary then for what you actually needed. But it holds. It holds in the way things hold when they're put together honestly, with the right materials, by people who meant it. I went home. Camden was still asleep. I made coffee and sat by the window and watched the sun come the rest of the way up over the rooftops, and I didn't brace for anything at all.